Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture a scene. It feels like something right out of a thriller, but this is all historically accurate. It's February 21st, 1991. We are deep in the Iraqi desert, maybe 100 miles north of the Saudi border.
And this is just 3 days before the ground war of Operation Desert Storm is set to kick off.
Right. And we're focused on this one guy, Major Samir Ali Qadir of the Iraqi 45th Infantry Division. He's sitting in a massive trench line. It stretches for almost a mile. But here's the thing that really struck me in the source material. He is completely, totally relaxed, confident even.
Which just seems insane, given what we know is about to happen. But from his perspective, it made perfect sense. He is convinced his position is a ghost. He has his men hiding in these caves dug into a plateau during the day.
No latrines, nothing.
Nothing. Absolutely no movement during daylight. He thinks to the coalition satellites flying over, this whole patch of desert just looks empty.
And he thinks he knows their game plan. He's studied all the maps. He's expecting the French 6th Light Armored Division to come rolling down the road sooner or later. And he's got nearly 350 men, 8 tons of ammo, just waiting to ambush them. He thinks he's the hunter.
But this is where the modern battlefield just changes everything. So, cut to 100 miles south. We're in a tent in Saudi Arabia with a 26-year-old American intelligence specialist, Sergeant Jesus Gonzalez. And he's just staring at thermal data, at imagery for the 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry.
And he sees it, the heat signatures. He realizes that this unoccupied trench is not empty at all. It's a major fortified position, and the guys heading towards it, they're not the French. It's the 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry of the 101st Airborne.
And that single realization, that information gap, it really sets the stage for everything we're going to talk about today.
We are diving deep into Operation Desert Storm by Frank Hancock. Now, I want to be really clear for everyone listening. This is not your standard high school history textbook version of the Gulf War. We're not just looking at arrows on a map. This is a gritty, boots-on-the-ground look at one specific battalion, the Bastogne Bulldogs, and how they lived through the buildup and the fight.
And what's so fascinating is that the mission of this deep dive isn't just to, recount a battle. It's really to understand a transformation.
Yeah.
We're looking at how the U.S. Army went from its absolute lowest point after Vietnam to becoming what they actually called a Renaissance Army in 1990.
And we get to see what it was really like for those soldiers just sitting in the sand waiting for the order to go.
Exactly.
So let's rewind a bit. You mentioned the low point. I think a lot of people forget this. We see the military today and we just assume it's always been this high-tech polished machine. But the source material describes the Army in 1973 as, well, frankly, a disaster.
It was a broken institution. The author, Frank Hancock, he shares this incredible anecdote from when he was a young lieutenant in Germany back in '73. He shows up to his first platoon formation, fresh-faced officer, introduces himself, and the platoon just greets him with a string of profanity.
Just open hostility.
Open hostility, zero discipline. And it gets so much worse. He talks about the drug use being rampant. I mean, it was endemic. The previous platoon leader had actually been arrested for smoking hashish with his own soldiers.
That's mind-blowing. An officer getting high with the men he's supposed to be leading.
It was a total collapse of order. But the detail that really stuck with me, and I think this paints the picture better than any statistic could, was about officer safety in their own barracks. It was so dangerous that the NCO on duty, the charge of quarters, carried something called a bunk adapter.
Wait, explain that. A bunk adapter.
Yeah, it's a heavy steel pole. It's used to connect bunk beds. They carried it as a makeshift club for self-protection.
Against their own soldiers?
Against their own soldiers. That was the reality of the 1973 Army.
That is just wild. So you have a military where officers need steel pipes to feel safe walking down their own hallways. How on earth do you go from that to the force that just rolled over the 4th largest army in the world in 1991? That's a massive turnaround in less than 20 years.
It really was a renaissance. And it was driven by two main things. The 1973 Yom Kippur War, which was a huge wake-up call about how lethal modern missiles had become, and, of course, the ever-present Soviet threat. The Army realized it was falling way behind.
So they started a massive overhaul.
A complete overhaul, and this is where we get the famous Big 5 weapons systems.
Right. The Abrams, the Bradley.
Exactly. The M1 Abrams tank, which could fire on the move. The M2 Bradley fighting vehicle. Then you had the UH-60 Black Hawk for utility, the AH-64 Apache for attack, and the Patriot missile for air defense.
So they got all new toys, but, I mean, new gear doesn't fix a drug problem. It doesn't fix a discipline problem.
You're absolutely right. The gear was only part of it. The real revolution was in the doctrine and the people. They shifted to something called airland battle. This idea that you could fight outnumbered and still win by being smarter, faster, and attacking deep. And crucially, this was the be-all-you-can-be recruiting era.
Ah, the commercials.
The commercials actually worked.
Yeah.
They brought in a higher quality of recruit, they built up a professional NCO corps, the sergeants, and they started this incredibly intense training at places like the National Training Center in the Mojave Desert, where units would fight against an opposing force that was, frankly, often better than the real Soviets.
So by 1990, you've got this Renaissance army. It's lethal, it's full of thinking soldiers, it has the best tech, but there's a catch, isn't there?
There's a huge catch. They haven't been tested yet, not in a real major war.
They look great on paper, but nobody knows for sure if it'll work when the shooting starts.
And that brings us right to the unit at the center of this story. The 101st Airborne Division. The Screaming Eagles.
Now, when I hear airborne, I immediately think parachutes. I'm picturing Band of Brothers, jumping into Normandy in World War II.
And that's their heritage, for sure. They're very proud of it. But by 1990, the technology had really shifted them from airborne to air assault.
What's the practical difference?
Oh, it's huge.
Mhm.
Paratroopers jump out of a plane, they land, and then they're just light infantry. They're on foot. Air assault uses helicopters, Black Hawks, Chinooks, to conduct what's called vertical envelopment.
Vertical envelopment. It sounds like a corporate buzzword, but I'm guessing it means something much cooler.
It means they can pick up thousands of troops, artillery pieces, everything, fly them clean over the enemy's front lines, and drop them deep in the rear. It gives you incredible speed and total surprise. But, and this is a big but, helicopters are basically just flying trucks. They have very little armor.
Right, you shoot a Black Hawk, it's going down.
Exactly. So if you fly them into a hot zone with heavy anti-aircraft fire, they are incredibly vulnerable. It's a very high-risk, high-reward way to fight.
Okay, so let's meet the team that was asked to take that risk. The book really highlights some incredible characters in the 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry.
It really does feel like a cast of characters. At the top, you've got the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hancock. His call sign and what his troops called him was the Warlord.
The Warlord. That's subtle.
He earned it. He was this athletic, intensely competitive guy. But the book notes he also had this self-effacing armor.
Yeah.
He wasn't a screamer. He trusted his people to do their jobs.
And then you've got his executive officer, his XO, Major John Chappell.
A duke.
Because he looked like John Wayne.
Looked like him, acted like him. He was the classic bad cop to Hancock's good cop. A real strict disciplinarian. You need that balance in a command team.
And then there's Command Sergeant Major Johnny Rock Riley.
Rock Riley, even the name. Right. He was the real deal. A Vietnam vet who fought at the Battle of Dak To. The sources all describe him as a stone-cold warrior. And when you have a battalion of young soldiers who have never seen combat, having a sergeant major who has stared down the enemy, that's a huge psychological anchor.
And finally, the intel officer, Captain Jose Delgado.
The S2. He's the guy who actually predicted the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait when a lot of other people thought Saddam was just bluffing. He saw the troop buildups and was screaming, "This is real."
So August 2nd, 1990 happens. Saddam invades Kuwait. The 101st gets the call. They're the division-ready force, which means they're first out the door.
And the deployment was just chaos, a massive logistical nightmare, trying to get thousands of soldiers and all their gear halfway across the world. And when they finally landed in Saudi Arabia, it was an absolute culture shock.
The book describes the scene at King Fahd International Airport. 125-degree heat.
Like walking into an oven. And remember, the infrastructure wasn't there yet. They were literally living in parking garages at the airport for a while.
Yeah.
Then they moved to Camp Eagle 2, which sounds official, but it was just a giant tent city in the middle of nowhere.
And the daily life. It sounds miserable.
It was the flies and dysentery phase.
Yeah.
This is the unglamorous part of war nobody talks about. They were eating these tray rations, T-rats, and at first, the cooks would open all the trays at once to speed up the line.
Which, in a desert swarming with flies...
You got it. It was like ringing the dinner bell for every insect for miles around. Flies would just swarm the food, and mass sickness followed. Yeah. Dysentery just tore through the ranks.
There is one detail about the MREs that made me laugh, though.
The microwave trick.
Yeah. They didn't have heaters, so they just lay the MRE pouches on the black canvas of the tents in the direct sun.
And in that heat, that was more than enough to cook the meal. It shows you the ingenuity of the American soldier. But it was grim. They were washing their clothes in plastic basins. Water was so limited.
But in the middle of all this misery, the heat, the sickness, There's this bright spot I really want to mention. A woman named Linda Patterson.
Yes, this is a really touching connection to the unit's past. Linda Patterson was a civilian from San Mateo, California. Her brother had been killed in Vietnam, serving with this exact same unit, the 1327. She'd adopted them back then, and when 1990 rolled around, she fired up the whole support network again.
And she made sure every single soldier got mail.
Which is just huge for morale. When you're sitting in the dirt, scared and sick, a letter from a stranger saying, "We're thinking of you," makes a world of difference.
Because at the same time, they had this terrifying mission, the Covering Force mission.
In a sector called AO Normandy, and their nickname for the job was the Speed Bump.
That does not sound good.
No, it doesn't. They were the furthest forward unit in the whole coalition. Their job was to cover a 20-kilometer-wide sector of open desert. And here's the picker. They're light infantry. They have no tanks, just TROW missiles mounted on Humvees.
So if the Iraqi armored divisions, with their T-72 tanks, decide to roll south,
The 1327 was supposed to delay them, to take the punch and fall back. The division commander, General Pei, literally looked a company commander in the eye and said, "You will be the first ground unit engaged." They were just out there, exposed.
and they had to improvise everything. They were using rolls of chain-link fence just to get their Humvees unstuck from the sand.
And smearing mud all over their vehicles. Their trucks were all green forest camouflage. They stuck out like a sore thumb in the desert, so they had to make their own camo with mud until the paint crews could finally catch up.
So they're out there serving as speed bumps, but then the whole strategy shifts. The heavy metal arrives.
This is the turning point.
Right.
Sevcorps comes over from Germany. This is the big armor, the M1 Abrams tanks in huge numbers. And that signaled that the U.S. wasn't just defending Saudi Arabia anymore. They were going on offense.
And this leads to a really intense, pivotal moment for Lieutenant Colonel Hancock. He's just sitting in his tent, and he picks up a magazine.
Right. And he reads an article about the Battle of Ia Drang in Vietnam, the battle from the book and movie We Were Soldiers. In 1965, a U.S. battalion air assaulted into a landing zone and was almost completely overrun because intelligence had failed to spot a huge enemy force right next door.
And Hancock reads this and realizes the parallels are just terrifyingly close.
He was deeply, deeply disturbed by it. He saw how an intel failure led to mass casualties. He got his staff together, Hancock, the Duke, all of them, and he made a vow. He said, and this is the PG version, "We're not having doing that."
That fear of a hot LZ, a hot landing zone, dropping his men into a meat grinder, that really shaped all their planning from then on.
It did. It made them cautious, but also creative. Because the new plan, Desert Rendezvous II, was unbelievably audacious. The division moved 500 miles west to a staging area near Rafah. And the plan wasn't to just march into Kuwait. It was to launch the largest air assault in military history, deep into Iraq.
They were going to fly over the enemy and set up a forward operating base called FOB Cobra to cut off the whole Euphrates Valley.
The famous left hook. When Hancock first saw the map, his internal reaction was just pure shock. He thought to himself, where in the hell are we? And then, good grief, we're going first. They were the tip of the spear.
Let's move to the eve of battle. January 17th, 1991. The air war kicks off.
And the whole atmosphere shifted immediately. They're watching B-52s and F-15s flying north, right over their heads. And that gets huge morale boost because the very first shots of the war were actually fired by Apache helicopters from their own division, taking out Iraqi radar sites to open up that air corridor.
But the tension on the ground at their assembly area, TAA Campbell, was still incredibly high. It wasn't just excitement, it was fear.
Extremely high. They had these chemical scares constantly. The M8 alarms were going off all the time.
Well, this wasn't a drill.
No, not a drill. The NBC officer nuclear biological chemical was actually picking up trace amounts of sarin and mustard gas that were drifting down from Iraqi bunkers that had been bombed further north.
So you're trying to sleep in a hole in the ground, and you're putting on your gas mask every few hours, knowing that nerve agent is literally in the air around you.
The psychological toll is just immense. And they had friendly fire scares. A brand new Chinook helicopter crashed. A battery exploded near the perimeter. And for a few minutes, everyone thought it was incoming artillery. It was just chaos.
And they were positioned right next to the French 6th Light Armored Division.
Right on their flank. And there's this great and kind of brutal quote in the book involving the French.
Oh, yeah.
A French officer hears the American plan flying hundreds of helicopters deep into Iraq, and he just sort of dryly remarks, "It sounds like the movie A Bridge Too Far."
Ouch. For anyone who doesn't know, A Bridge Too Far is about a famous, failed Allied airborne operation in World War II where they went too deep, got cut off, and were absolutely decimated.
Precisely. So that was a very real fear. That question was hanging in the air.
Yeah.
Were they about to execute a masterstroke of modern warfare, or were they flying into a complete disaster?
And the soldiers knew it. They were writing what they called any soldier letters, the letters to be sent home if they didn't make it. They're sitting in these holes realizing the only way home is straight through Iraq.
They even had the JAG officers, the lawyers, briefing them on the rules of engagement, telling them not to use too much force. And Hancock's response was just classic warlord. He told the lawyers if his men see an enemy squad, he's not sending a squad to fight them. He's dropping a B-52 on them.
He wasn't taking any chances.
No. He told his staff, I want to bring everyone home. He wasn't interested in a fair fight. He wanted overwhelming, crushing force at the point of attack.
So here we are. The Renaissance Army is assembled. The Bastogne Bulldogs are positioned on the far flank. They're about to launch this massive history-making maneuver.
And despite all the tech, all the big five weapons, it still comes down to the individual soldier, the human element. The source mentions a brand new lieutenant who showed up just 10 days before the invasion. He barely even knew his platoon's names. And there he was, sitting in the desert, trusting his training and just waiting for the word, go.
It really puts that whole smash-mouth army concept into perspective. It wasn't just about the machines. It was about the mindset of the people inside them.
Absolutely. The French officer compared it to a bridge too far. And as G-Day got closer, the leadership had to live with that question. Was the 101st Airborne about to rewrite the book on warfare, or were they flying into a trap, just like at Aya Drang? The answer was waiting for them at FOB Cobra.
And that's where we leave the Bastogne Bulldogs for this deep dive poised right on the edge of history, engines running, ready to launch into the complete unknown.
It's a powerful reminder that in war, no matter how good your plan is, the enemy always gets a vote.
So true. And for you, the listener, here's a final thought to chew on. We often look back at Desert Storm as this video game war, quick, clean, decisive. We see the footage of laser-guided bombs and think it was easy. But for the guys on the ground, like Sergeant Gonzalez staring at that trench line or the troops sleeping in chemical suits, the outcome was anything but certain. It's worth asking, how much of that clean victory was inevitable and how much of it was just bold, terrifying risk-taking by people who refused to fail?
That's the question.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.